know we intuitively kind of know that our food is related to our mood. I don't think people really understand how much their mood is impacted by their food.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching our videos. If you'd like to support us some more, you can explore our homemade natural skincare products at purelytallow.com. Thank you so much for supporting my small business. Hey everybody, welcome to the Carnivore Revolution. I'm Serena, and today my special guest is Kelly Ritter. Kelly, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm so excited to be here, Serena. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So we met at the Wired for Health retreat, a super awesome retreat. So you guys out there are looking for a way to get together with some other meat eaters and bond and go hiking and things like that. Make sure you're paying attention and looking for the information for the next retreat. It'll be fall of 2025. So we hope you guys can come and watch and just be part of it. So Kelly, I like to start with people's stories because that is huge. And that's what makes people want to listen to or watch the video. I mean, I just think people think we're nuts. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about your story and why you eat only meat or mostly meat.
Yeah, mostly. So I have a PhD, not an MD, if that makes any difference to people, but my
No.
background is in, clinical mental health. So you and I know, everybody probably listening knows how important meat is for our mental health, those amino acids. So I've always liked meat, but I was thinking, like everybody else, that we were supposed to eat vegetables. So for me, I went to, I did the traditional master's, EDS, PhD, all in counseling, and then got really interested in gut and brain health. And went back to school to become a nutritional therapist. And that was rocking along, liking that a lot. And one of my colleagues that's a nutritional therapist was a carnivore. And he really didn't talk about it much, but I was curious. And I had done a lot of gut healing, the traditional things that you think of for gut healing. And I'd had a lot of improvement, but I was still just curious if I could go even further in my health. And that's when, it was right before we all went in lockdown for 2020, lockdown for COVID. And we had been on a family trip to Mexico. I came back from the trip and I had a rash all over my legs. I'd always had reactions to food, and I just thought that's the way I am. And I was just sick of it, honestly. I was sick of the histamine reactions. I was just like, I should feel better. I'm a non-drinker, non-smoker. I eat healthy foods. I've healed my gut. I've done all this work on my mental health. How am I not feeling better than this? And so that's when I decided to do a 30-day carnivore experiment. And 2.5 years later, yeah, I did pretty strict carnivore for about 2 years, 2.5 years. And then got really into quantum health. So that's when I started changing some things up, but still big meat eater. Yeah, very meat forward.
Yeah. And I think meat is so important. And people, just like at the beginning, you said, I think everybody knows meat is important. I don't think everybody knows that. I think most people are only getting 50 or 60 grams in a day, which is not enough for a toddler in most situations. So, I think the idea is that people know, and we'd like to think people know. And there was a time where I didn't pay attention to that. And I'm sure there was a time for you too. And if you don't pay attention and put meat at the forefront, you're going to be deficient.
Yeah. And I think, especially for mental health, what I started learning about neurotransmitters and how our neurotransmitters, the building blocks for our neurotransmitters, are amino acids. So obviously, we want complete sources of protein for our amino acids. Essential amino acids, essential fatty acids. There are no essential carbohydrates. You start to put all this information together, and you're like, why are people, the general public, the media, all the other experts, why are they pushing these carbohydrates and that we need? And when I first started teaching gut health, I was talking about, eat the rainbow and all the vegetables. And then, of course, when you cut them out and you're eating a carnivore diet and you feel not just a little better, so we're talking like 1,000 times better. You're like, wait, what is happening? How can this be? And why do we keep pushing this? So I was really surprised at how much brain fog lifted. I didn't realize kind of how much brain fog I had. And I knew I was an anxious person, but kind of that type A person. So all the things that just continued to improve. And so then I just started experimenting with clients, and saying, you might want to think about your protein intake. And I was already talking about that as a nutritional therapist, but really starting to help people dial in on the nutrition piece of mental health. So then I have done extensive training with Dr. Georgia Ede. I went back to school to get more certifications in mental health nutrition specifically. But even there, Georgia is great. Georgia Ede, Dr. Ede is amazing. But even there, people are still pushing the veggies, the fruits and veggies. And I'm like, you're not understanding A, the anti-nutrients, and you're B, not really understanding addiction. And even mental health, people that understand nutrition and mental health sometimes don't really understand how important it is that people get enough meat in their diet. They're like, I eat protein. It's like, what protein?
Right.
And are you actually absorbing the nutrients from the food that you are eating? That's another big piece of it. So,
Yeah, it's huge because that thing about there being no essential carbohydrates is very confusing to a lot of people. And so let's just clear that up. So it's not carbohydrates that you need, it's glucose, and your body makes that, right?
right. Gluconeogenesis. Yeah. I I think it's really helpful for people. Yeah. So sometimes people get really defensive, right? They're like, oh, we need it. And you need yes, we actually do need glucose, but your body does make the glucose that you need through gluconeogenesis. And it all essential means it's like minerals are essential, amino acid. It just means the body can't make it. It's not like I'm
Right.
trying to rob you of something. And I'm all for food freedom. I think people should experiment and see what works for them and do their own research because I was shocked when I started learning more about specifically about oxalates and phytic acid and the ways that our body is not absorbing the nutrients from some of these plant sources of food. It's being blocked. So I'm not actually an anti fruits and vegetables person. I've incorporated local and seasonal,
Mhm.
but I'm just so much more interested in making sure that we're getting animal sources of food for our protein and fat, right? It's just so much better for us.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that, the protein and the fats are essential, but our bodies can't make them. And so by essential, we mean without those things, you will die. So if you do not eat any fat and your body can't make it, and you do not eat any protein at all, and your body can't make it, we won't survive. And I think the key is that if you look back to years and years and years and years and years ago, we would not have survived as a species if our body couldn't make the glucose or the carbohydrates, the glucose that's essential that we couldn't find way back then. Like in Paleolithic times, people call it hunter gatherers. There weren't an abundance of carbohydrates. There weren't an abundance of fruits and vegetables. They would come across them every now and then, but that wasn't something that you could just go to your local grocery store and buy.
Right. No. Right. Well, we evolved on
Yeah,
meat. Our brains
that's
are
right.
big and beautiful because of the animal sources of food that we have been noshing on for a long time, right? But I also
Yeah.
think people are like, well, it's the carbohydrates, all carbohydrates break down to glucose. I don't really care if it's a cookie or a vegetable or whatever it is. So I think sometimes people get confused about that as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
So you mentioned food freedom a little while ago, and people think that we're being ultra restrictive. People think that what we are doing is the opposite of food freedom, and they're not taking into consideration those of us that feel like we're abstainers and not moderators. And so for me, being on the carnivore diet is the ultimate food freedom for me. I am more free now. And I think part of it is it's compartmentalized, like it's in a box. The things that I eat on a daily basis, the things that I eat regularly are in a box. Like these are the things that I eat. And so for me, that's freedom because I don't have all of those other things to choose from because that's when I make bad choices.
yeah, that's the piece that I think most people don't really understand about. I don't moderate well either. I'm an abstainer as well. So this is
Mhm.
the most freedom I've ever felt was,
Yeah.
finding carnivore and feeling so much better, and then knowing exactly what I'm gonna eat that feels good in my body. I think there isn't any better freedom than that. So
Right.
whatever people decide that they wanna eat, that's why I'm all about food freedom. But I think people don't understand addiction, and
Right.
food addiction is an absolute real thing, and it's not just the processed carbohydrates. It can be, because sweetness in general can trigger cravings. And I mean, we would come across sugar so rarely in nature that our brain is wired to, if we do come across it, to get more of that. And so some of us don't moderate well. There are people that I think I've worked with people that do moderate pretty well. And I think it's fine. I think that all moderators have certain things that they don't
Right.
moderate very well, and all
Yeah.
of us abstainers do have some things that we moderate well. It just might
Yes.
not be right food.
Right.
So I think that's important. And a lot of practitioners, it just really irritates me when they are pushing moderation and they're pushing, balanced diet and eat the rainbow. I mean, I did that too, so I can't get too frustrated with it. But come on, move ahead. The
Right.
science is catching up. And we don't need to wait for science for us to experiment to feel good.
Right.
But even the science is starting to get here. And so if we can get ahead of that and understand that it's really, when people suffer from food addiction, this is the most freedom that you can experience on a
Yeah.
carnivore diet. Yeah.
And I think even more than the studies that everybody is always asking for, even more than that is kind of being your own science experiment. And there is something to be said for that. Like it really means something that you switched like you did and started feeling amazing and you got a clear head and your brain fog went away. Like for me, one of the main things, and this is so silly, but people our age will get it. When you go to log into something and it says we're going to send you a 6-digit code, you have to add that. Like the panic that I used to go into when that 6-digit code would flash up on my screen while I'm trying to remember it and go back to the website and remember those numbers and put that code in. The panic that I would feel when, and everybody who's watching that's our age that has been through it is going to know exactly what we're talking about here. That panic that would set in that I'm not going to be able to remember those 6 numbers and put them in. And I remember the day that happened and it was not a big deal. And I was able to just remember that it doesn't sound like a lot. 6 digits does not sound like a lot, but it is when you have brain fog to have to remember those, go back to the website, navigate it, and put those 6 digits in. You know what I mean? Like, I think that brain fog listing. So my point was that I think you can be your own experiment. We've all done it with things like juice fasting, vegetarian, vegan, plant-based. We've all done all of these things, right? Weight Watchers. You didn't ask for a study when you started Weight Watchers or when you ate a Pop-Tart or when you stopped at Dunkin' Donuts, but everybody wants to see the studies when it comes to carnivore. And so my advice is always just try it. Just do it for 30 days. You're certainly not going to, even if you thought it was bad for you, you're not going to create any damage in the first 30 days that you can't undo if you decide it's not for you, or, oh my goodness, you find out it's not working for you, or it does make you sick, which would be weird. But like, I just think that you can be your own science experiment. You can be your own N=1 and try it. And then you'd have a story like we do. Like nobody believes us or very few people believe us, but it's true. This made me feel amazing. And it can make you feel amazing too. So I think like, don't get stuck on the studies, right? Because those studies are all just jaded and influenced anyway, right?
Well, in nutritional studies in general, it's very difficult to conduct
Mm-hmm.
nutritional studies that are worth the dang anyway. And the thing is, I know who's funding the studies. And so it can get a little convoluted, but certainly nutrition is not an easy thing to study. So, and it really is an experiment, even if you're a carnivore, because some of us do really well on beef and ruminant meats, and that's pretty common. And then some of us, there are people who feel better on chicken and fish. And so you're still experimenting,
Right.
even if you're eating an animal-based diet. And yeah, I think that it is an N of one. You are your own experiment. And I would just say 30 days, it took me probably 3 months
Oh yeah.
to get, because I've talked about this before. I kept like condiments and things in. I don't even like added some condiments in that I didn't have before. It was weird.
Yeah.
It is an adjustment psychologically.
It is.
And and you would be right to question things. And, I think we should be questioning all the things that we do.
Yeah.
But for sure, so I would suggest 30 days, but also realize that it might take you longer to actually fully get carnivore. And I think even, Kelly Hogan, it took her a while to let go of some things like Jello
Yeah.
and Diet Coke
Yeah.
and
That's right.
Diet Soda, right?
Yeah.
Like, so be gentle. I guess my thing is
Mhm.
be gentle with yourself and realize that it
Yeah.
may take a little bit longer.
Yeah. And I tell people that same thing. Like people say, oh, but I can't give up my coffee or I can't give up my diet soda. You're still going to be so much better off as being like basically carnivore or basically meat based and keeping that diet soda in than you are right now. So it's definitely worth doing, even if it's not perfect, right? We're not after perfection, right?
Yeah, I know. And it can get, because sometimes we're like, oh, you've got to get rid of that. I mean, there's so many reasons to give up that diet soda
Yeah.
from a lot of, it's a neurotoxin. I'm just going to throw it out there.
Yeah.
But yes, start where you can start. And if there's something you feel like you can't live without, then eat animal based and leave that in for a little bit until you can get yourself. I'm not really a weaner. I mean,
Mm.
I don't wean myself. I'm an all or nothing kind of girl. So
Yeah.
for me, I cold turkey is
Hmm.
tends to be better for me. But I did find on carnivore there was a transition
Yeah.
period of like I just had to kind of get my brain wrapped around what we were doing.
Yeah.
And then once I was on board, it was, it's so easy. It's the
I
thing.
know. I know it's so easy. And I'm kind of the same way. Like I'm a black or white kind of person, but
Yeah.
there is a little bit of a gray area with carnivore. I find like I can use the
Yeah.
flavored electrolytes
Yeah.
and they don't seem to trigger me or make me want, other things. And so I think there is kind of a gray area for some people where you could do a little bit of that, or you can use spices when, some people can't. And that's one of the best things about carnivore to me is to use it as an elimination diet, right? Where you cut everything else out, you see how you feel, that's how you get a good baseline, right? And then you kind of add things back in.
Yeah. And see.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
that's the best thing you can do, trial and error. And I will say, since we were talking about memory and how challenging that can be, you've got to clean your brain. The more you age, we have to clean our brain and we can reverse age. And I find that in my 50s, now 53, it's really helpful for me to stay carnivore. If I ever, well, even like when I'm playing around with carnivore snacks and things, like some of the things that we can do with whey protein and stuff, I play around with that and see what I can do and what I can't do. And the menopausal stuff, the hot flashes will come back if I am moving in a direction that doesn't isn't what my body wants. And I'm like, oh, okay. So things like the electrolyte powders and things like that you might add in. But
mhm,
people think, oh, it's just my age, or
right.
I'm supposed to be not remembering things or having
Right.
hot flashes or not
Mhm.
sleeping. No, we're not. Your brain is supposed to still be working perfectly well, and we can remember things, and we don't have to live with all of those symptoms.
Yeah.
And I listen to so many friends and even some clients that complain about all those menopausal symptoms that I I find that I mean, for me personally, this has been the easiest way to not have any of those symptoms.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So what about fasting? How do you feel about that?
I think it's a great tool for people, it's particularly for mental health, right? But I'm also all about circadian rhythms, as you know. So
Hmm.
really supporting your circadian rhythms. And I do think that people can overfast and that when they continue to skip breakfast over and over and over again, because eating is a circadian signal to the body. So when mostly I want our light and dark to be dialed in, but then also the food. So we are day dwellers, we eat during daylight hours. So I think it can be helpful to play around with that, but I would rather people fast, stop your last meal earlier in the afternoon and fast overnight, which is, tends to be a little bit healthier for people who are struggling with mental health and anxiety. That's just what my experience has been with folks.
So what about, you mentioned hormones. So how do you find that you can treat somebody who is dealing with lots of hormone issues, do you just usually recommend the carnivore diet, or are there like some other
Mhm.
things that you tell people to?
Yeah, so I really do a lot of the quantum health strategies
Yeah.
now.
Mhm.
I'm going to want people to dial in on their circadian rhythms and understand how to support their mitochondrial health. And
Mhm.
that's all about orienting our body, but also that is about eating nutritional food. So we want nutrient dense food consistently so that our body knows that it's going to get that nutrients that it can use. And that's going to come from animal sources of food. So not only do I dial in on the nutrition piece for balance, especially for balancing hormones, you've got to have enough fat, first of all. If you don't have enough fat, you can't make the hormones.
Right.
But almost every function in the body, almost every function, is is influenced by our circadian rhythms, including when you're making your hormones, when you're making your neurotransmitters, when it gets released, all of those things. So I feel like if you don't have that piece in place, a lot of people can have a lot of improvement, which is what happened with me. Had huge improvements from the food piece.
Mhm.
And then this was just, I don't want to say icing on the cake for this group, but like this, because we don't eat that crap, but this is
Yeah.
like really up leveled
Yeah.
my health was to then do the non-food things to support
Yeah.
my body.
Okay, so let's talk about those non-food things. So you want people
Okay.
to eat during daylight hours, and you want
Preferably.
people to get up with the sun, watch the sunrise, right? Before
Yeah,
using your device, right? That's so important.
that's right. Yeah, so natural light before screen light. I would say sunlight before, your phone or the TV or your computer or flipping on all the lights in your house. If you can get some natural light first, it doesn't have to be a sunny day. I think that's what's confusing for people. They're
Mhm.
like, "Oh, but it's not a sunset." You don't have to watch sunrise or have a good view to be able to benefit from the light frequencies that are available at that time of day. So it's setting the tone. It's really helping that master clock in your brain. The suprachiasmatic nucleus is getting set to your day. So when to make what, when to release what, all of those things are happening. So when our food is dialed in and we're also rising, and some people have to get up before sunrise. So I just ask them if they can mitigate the blue light. So stay off your phone, don't turn on the TV, use, red or orange bulbs, get the light bulbs that don't have the blue, the sharp blue in the morning, or wear blue blockers. I have tried to wear the blue blockers in the shower. It is very awkward. I only did it a couple of times. I was like, this is too awkward because they fog up and which, but do what you can to mitigate that blue light before sunrise and after sunset, because that blue light is what's telling your brain that it is daytime, and you won't be releasing melatonin properly, you won't be packing up cortisol, all of the things that need to happen. So
So
that's in a nutshell
So you
those
like to
things.
tell people if they can, and I know not everybody's schedule permits this, but be outside. You can't be in your car and you can't be looking through a window at your house, but be outside just for a few minutes in the early morning hours at some point before lots of blue light. And then the same thing in the evening, right? You want your eyes and your brain to know that the sun is setting, right?
Right. So we have sensors in our eyes and on our skin. And you're right, the modern windows block that. And also the windows in the car block that. But you could crack a window in the car. You can crack a window or open a door or whatever you can do in your house to get that natural light. And yeah, there's a whole process to it but morning light and evening light, and then blocking it when the blue light isn't outside, you don't want it inside either. So
Mhm.
that goes a long ways, particularly for mental health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think mental health is such a huge component. I mean, obviously to our physical health even. And I think
Yes.
people don't take that into account. And so part of being on a very low carb or meat based uh, whole foods diet is the impact on your mental health. So not only is it the brain fog, but things like depression and anxiety and stress, right? All of that gets better.
All of that gets better. And I really, I've always been interested, obviously, I've been always interested in stress and anxiety. And I've always approached it very outside the box, open minded. But I had no idea how much we could improve Stress, depression, all the mood-related mood swings.
Mhm.
I knew that that was related to our food, but it's just so helpful if you're at least limiting those carbohydrates, a ketogenic, ketovore, carnivore, there's a lot of benefit. And yes, you're right. Our mental health and our physical health are not separate. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we so impacts how you feel. And I think people know that to some
Yeah.
degree. They just try to ignore it. Like, you know that because when you go somewhere and eat junk food all day long, you know you wake up not feeling good the next day. But most people don't really
Mhm.
attribute it to the food, even though I think they know.
I know, Serena, I think we intuitively we know the food's important, but most people have the wrong info. So they're
Right. That's
adding
true.
fruits, they're adding fruits and vegetables and whole grains because that's what their doctors tell them to do. Even nutritionists and dietitians and people are telling them moderation and eat balanced, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work for those of us who have addiction issues, and then it just keeps us spinning our tails, or histamine reactions, all different kinds of immune systems, skin problems, all of these things. And if we know from our conversations with Sally K. Norton, like there's so many things that can be contributing to what health conditions that are related to what we're eating. And I just don't think I know we intuitively kind of know that our food is related to our mood. I don't think people really understand how much their mood is impacted by their food. And once you do, and even when you do realize that, then what information do you get if you just go online and start searching? It's
That's
not
right.
helpful.
No, because you're going to get the information set forth from all of the academies and the associations in the United States that all push grains and plant-based and all the things that are, in my opinion, those things are highly, highly contributing to the mental state of America as a whole, with
Yeah.
many things that America is struggling with. So much of that, I believe, is from diet. Things like people being psychotic and people ending up in mental
Mhm.
institutions. And then there's, the other things like Alzheimer's and dementia that
Yeah.
are very closely related to your diet. And there are actually studies where there are people in nursing homes who can't remember things, and you take away their cholesterol lowering medication and feed them a steak. And by the end of the day, they're remembering things they didn't remember before. I mean, it's
Right.
just insane.
I know. It's incredible, but it's also really powerful, right? Like,
Yeah. Hmm.
because once you do have the information and if you're open enough, that's the thing. And
Yeah.
generally, I find that people, the sicker they are, the more open they become because you've
Yeah.
tried all the things that everybody tells you to try. And if you're still sick, you're like, well, that can't be right. So the more
Mhm.
open you are, and I've interviewed enough and worked with enough people with chronic illness that there's this moment of reckoning of you're open to really anything,
Yeah.
and you realize that only you can do it. All healing comes from within, and
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that we're supposed to do that alone. I think we can have we need practitioners to help us along, but
Yeah.
only all that healing has to be received and has to come from within. And that's a
Mhm.
real pivotal moment for a lot of people when you realize nobody's coming. I've got to do this. I am
That's
in
right.
charge of my own health. Advocate for yourself.
Mhm.
And you're sort of like, what do I have to lose to try
That's right.
this crazy thing for 30 days?
That's right. Yeah. Well, yeah. And that's what I was saying before. Like, people have done so many things for 30 days, right? So many things we've tried. So when
Oh,
you
yeah.
think you've tried everything, maybe it's time to try this. So let's talk about grounding, because I know you're a
Oh,
big
yeah.
proponent of grounding.
Yes.
And so let's talk about what that means and the easiest way for people to do that.
Yes. So I use the term earthing,
Okay.
grounding, all the same. We
Okay.
use the term grounding to sort of, in psychotherapy, it's like bringing you back to the present moment. So that's why I switch it to earthing, because what you're literally doing is put your skin, so human skin, touching Earth's surface. So we could be touching leaves on a tree or a bush, or our feet in the grass, sand, dirt, rocks, even concrete. Actually, we can practice grounding or earthing on concrete as long as it's not painted. So there are a lot of ways to practice this. And what happens, is that it actually reduces inflammation in the body. So there's most of the research is looking at pain, reduction in pain, reducing inflammation, and helping people with sleep. Well, those three things alone are going to help people feel a lot better. What I think is really fascinating is that we absorb electrons from the Earth's surface through our skin. And so this is quantum. So applied quantum biology, which is a new emerging science, is really looking at this and saying, this is how we're designed. It's a magnificent, we are meant, every single part of our body is conductive. And so when we're touching Earth's surface, or a leaf, or whatever we're touching that is conductive, we're grounded. And that's what's happening. And we can use devices to do that too. I'm sitting on a grounding mat right now. I sleep on a grounding mat. I have grounding shoes, like all the things, but really you don't need all of it's free just to go outside.
Yeah, right.
And yeah. And any time, people are like, well, if it's freezing or raining's really actually great because that even helps more conductivity. But it doesn't have to be long. It's virtually instantaneous. So it's amazing. So if you're already out there getting the light, you might as well be touching some earth. And then you're just layering on the healing, which I love.
So you can sit in the grass. Let's say, your clothing doesn't matter, right? Your clothing doesn't prevent it. You still get what you need.
It needs to be skin. So it depends on if your clothing is conductive, but most of us are probably wearing stuff that's not gonna be working. So you do have to have skin touching, but it can be a finger. And what's really interesting, like if your pinky finger if you are touching, let's just say that you are sitting on the grass or on the ground and you're touching that, even if just a little part of you is touching, your whole body's grounded. So if any part of us is grounded, all of us is grounded. So you don't have to have your whole body, but it does feel nice to have as much of your body doing that as you can. And I just ask people to try it and see what they think. It's kind of like carnivore. You're going to experiment and see for yourself.
Right.
I can feel it almost immediately reducing if my shoulders are up and I feel stressed and anxious, which is, a typical feeling for a lot of us, I'll feel better almost instantaneously when I'm outside practicing earthing.
That's amazing. And what about cold therapy? What do you think about that?
Yeah. So I also am a fan of cold therapy. It's kind of like fasting though, right? So I want people to be on their way to optimizing their hormones. I want your circadian rhythms supported and kind of dialed in because it is a stress on the body. So we can use it as a tool to help with healing. And what I love about cold therapy or cold, thermogenesis, right? Cold plunging, even if you're just using on your hands and your face or your feet or doing little baby steps to get in there. What it's forcing your body to do is generate heat. We generate infrared light in our cells, which is anti-inflammatory, which is healing. So there are a lot of healing benefits to using that, to using thermogenesis that I think it's just very helpful. And then of course, mentally, it does give you this zing in your brain. It's really helpful. We've seen there's information on dopamine, but I also think that it's probably releasing endorphins too, just based on the way most people feel invigorated and feel this, you start to crave it. But it's been really interesting to have clients with anxiety and trauma and then utilize red light therapy, use the light, but also using the cold therapy has been there aren't even words to describe what happens for people. They feel like they're totally different people after they have been incorporating this for a very short amount of time. It's like their brain is finally clearing up and they're finally feeling more like themselves. And even it can feel like it's kind of like carnivore too. Like you can feel better than you've ever felt in your whole life. And you're not even sure it's like better than I feel like myself, but better than myself has ever felt. So
yeah. And let's talk just for a minute briefly. You and I talked about this at the retreat a little bit. don't get in super cold. Like you see people getting in water with big chunks of ice. And I think it's really important to note that as a newbie, you should not get into, 32-degree water. I gave myself nerve damage doing that 3 separate times in the first month and a half of this.
Right.
So it's definitely worth it to start warmer and work your way down, right?
Right, and go slowly, and, yeah, you don't have to. I think some of us too are like, "All in, if this is gonna
Yeah.
help me, I'm gonna go, all in, and it's gonna be an ice or nothing." Yeah,
Yes.
you can go slowly, and you can go warmer. Anything below body temp is technically a cold plunge. Okay, so you can start with it in the 50s or even 60s. I have clients that have autoimmune issues. And so it's fine if we're starting at 65 degrees. Like it's a
Okay.
perfectly, that's where they feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine.
And you don't have to feel like you're less than because your water is warmer than the guy next door, right?
No, right? Like no comparing.
Yeah, that's right.
That's not helpful to
Yeah.
compare yourself to anybody else's journey. I was just talking about that the other day. You have to enter the forest. We all enter in our own spot, and you can't follow anybody else's journey. I was talking about the Holy Grail,
Yeah.
like the Knights of the Round Table, all after the Holy Grail, but they all have to enter the forest in their own spot.
That's
So,
right. Yeah, I think that's huge is just, and come as you are, like to all of this. There's so much information here, so many different things we can do to be better and to feel better, but come as you are and incorporate like one
mhm.
thing when you can. And I think if you had to pick one of those things that we've talked about to be the most important, could you pick like what would it be?
It's really, I think light is the most important for me.
Yeah.
I think if I was going to start now, I would start with dialing in on the light.
Okay.
I feel like we are light heals like, so that just makes sense to me. But the food is that's just really a tough call for me because I
Okay.
really think nutrition needs to be dialed in. That's foundational. So
Mhm.
light and nutrition are sort of together, and those
Okay.
are foundational for me.
Okay. So if you had one piece of advice for people, what would it be?
Yeah, get your light right, get your vibe right. I don't know. Yeah. I think starting with morning light, see if you
Okay.
can dial whatever time you do get up. Don't worry about whether it's sunrise or not or
Okay.
whatever, but if you can get up and get some natural light, or if you have to be up super early, like work that out in your life so that
Okay.
you're getting exposed to that early morning light. That's
Okay.
what I would do.
Okay. Now tell people where they can find you.
Oh, nourish-soul.com and I'm always on Instagram. And I answer my own Instagram messages
Okay.
still. So that's a good place to interact with me. And then, yeah, my website has all the stuff.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. It was so nice to see
Thank
you again and so nice to have this
you.
conversation. Maybe we help some people today.
I hope so. And that's the point, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so
Absolutely.
great to see you again, Serena.
Thank you. And thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time on the Carnivore